Whether you are reading a newspaper article or listening to a report on a radio or talking to your own parents, grandparents, friends, aunts, and uncles about politics and economics, something to be aware of is the relationship between a thesis and an anecdote. Because a great deal of what we do as human beings, I'm guilty of this myself, as I'll explain in just a moment, is that we present someone with a thesis. And most of the time, if we know the person we're speaking to, we know the audience we're reaching out to, we already know what it is they want to believe. We know how biased they are in favor of the thesis, and then we can present them with a series of anecdotes that will increase their conviction in this thesis without the person really questioning the relationship between the anecdote and the thesis, whether or not one actually supports the other, or whether or not there might not be a wealth of other anecdotes, other considerations that are just left out of this conversation or left out of this news report, right? That would really challenge the relationship between thesis and anecdote. So we do this in economics, we do this in politics. People come onto YouTube and they tell you that Bitcoin is a great way to get rich quick, or they tell you that Bitcoin is going to transform the world of finance and economics as we know it. They tell you that Bitcoin is going to replace government-controlled currency and the banking system entirely. They put out this thesis for an audience that already wants to believe it, and then they'll give a bunch of anecdotes. And many of those anecdotes may be true, but they don't actually support the thesis. I would have a pretty easy time convincing you in the audience that Richard Nixon was a terrible person, that Richard Nixon was a terrible president of the United States, or let's just say Richard Nixon made a series of decisions that really ruined life on planet Earth for the next 50 years after his time in office. Something like this. Some kind of thesis that Richard Nixon was bad and evil. I could write a book. I've done enough research. I could write a book about Richard Nixon, all right? Easily. And once I've established that thesis, for one thing, the only people who are going to watch my YouTube video, or the only people who are going to listen to me, I may just be talking to my friends or my family about this, they're people who probably already sympathize with. They're people who are already interested. Oh, here's a YouTube video about how Richard Nixon was a terrible person. Oh, here's a YouTube video that's going to tell me why Richard Nixon was the worst president in the history of the United States. Just the fact that they've chosen to click on that video, parallel to someone who chooses to click on a get-rich-quick video about Bitcoin or any other fad idea in free market economics at the moment, right? The fact that you've chosen to click on the video means that you are very unlikely to scrutinize the relationship between the anecdote and the thesis, and the relationship between the anecdote and myself, yourself, as the member of the listening part. Like, what does this mean to me? What's the relationship between me and the anecdote and me and the thesis? It's a kind of triangular analysis I'm inviting you to imagine here, right? I can tell you about how Richard Nixon was an alcoholic. I can tell you about Richard Nixon's prescription drug habits. I can tell you about his bizarre religious views. I can quote verbatim some things he said about black people. Okay? I can tell you some things about his sex life. I can tell you some things that are going to make Richard Nixon sound like a terrible person. All right? Richard Nixon was president of the United States in a very, very difficult period, economically and politically. There is an argument to be made that if Richard Nixon were not president of the United States, that what happened in American economics, it could have been worse. It could have been worse than the Great Depression, right? Like, it was a bad period for the economy, but without the decision Richard Nixon made, or someone else was in power who made even worse decisions, it could have been worse. It was a very difficult time politically, right? People tend to forget this now. Before Richard Nixon was president of the United States, he had been vice president of the United States. He was one of the best educated, best prepared people for the role of president of the United States because he had this long history in elite level politics, including global international diplomacy. Right now, I'm a very harsh critic of Richard Nixon. I think he made a lot of really bad decisions. But what if it was an amateur in that driver's seat? What if it was somebody more like JFK, who had been president of the United States at the time, or JFK himself, who hadn't gotten shot or something like this? I have to think about some real different pillars. You know what? Really? It could have been worse. It could have been World War III. It could have been worse than World War II. I'm not joking. I know enough about the politics, all right? And I can tell you some anecdotes that are actually positive things about Richard Nixon. One that I like to mention again, actually his relationship to American Indians, to First Nations people, to the indigenous people of the United States and Canada. You show me another president who cared in the slightest, down to and including, George W. Bush, Donald Trump, Bill Clinton. You show me another president who lived fair. All right? And we start to get a more complex, nuanced view of what Richard Nixon did and decided what the consequences were. But the problem is, it's so easy. It's so easy because you want to believe in the thesis, and the anecdotes, each one of them may be true and may be interesting and may be rewarding for you to listen to, right? Okay. What is Bitcoin? All right. And what is Bitcoin as an investment? And what is Bitcoin as a currency? All right. Bitcoin is not a currency. Bitcoin is the 21st century equivalent to collecting baseball cards. If in the whole world there are only so many Mickey Mantle baseball cards, don't Google it. He was a famous baseball player many years ago, and basically all of the baseball cards with his name and his face on are worth some money, right? Not just his rookie card, generally speaking. Mickey Mantle baseball cards are valuable. How many thousand of them are there in the world? Number may be unknown, but I mean, these were not scarce during his lifetime, right? Millions of these little pieces of paper were printed. Same thing with valuable comic books today, valuable video games, people collecting video games in the 1980s. It's like, dude, several million of these plastic cartridges were created in the 1980s. These were not scarce, but today they're valuable. Today why? Because they're perceived as valuable, because they're collectible, okay? There's a finite number of these baseball cards in circulation, and they have value because people desire them, people want to own them, people want to hold on to them and keep them, and many of those people one day will resell them onto the market, right? How reliable is it? How certain are you that in the future people will still want to buy Mickey Mantle baseball cards? Now, one thing is certain, there won't be more of them made. The total number of Mickey Mantle baseball cards, even if there were 21 million Mickey Mantle baseball cards, even if there were 21 million X-Men #1 comic books. X-Men #1 is not as scarce as Batman or Superman #1, by the way, just mentioning. If there were 21 million of them, the reality is every year some of them are destroyed, some of them are lost. They're kept in someone's house and the house burns down. They're kept in someone's house and the house is flooded, right? Whatever it is, mold. Some of them disappear, right? And also some of them people just take to their grave. Like people keep and they never sell again. They disappear for other reasons, right? So there's one thing you can be certain about. The supply is not going to expand. The supply is going to change. But what you can't be certain about is, in the future, is anybody going to care about Mickey Mantle? Is anyone going to care about baseball cards in general or this specific culturally assigned value, the desirability of a Mickey Mantle baseball? In the future, are people going to care about X-Men more or less? Are these X-Men comic books? But point out to you, there are enough of these items that you actually could use X-Men comic books or Mickey Mantle baseball cards. You could use it as a currency internationally, the same way you're using, to a very limited extent, the same way people are today using Bitcoin, right? Now, people buy Bitcoin, people invest in Bitcoin with the assumption that the value will go up and up and up, the same way they are now buying into baseball cards, Pokemon cards, video games, with the assumption they'll go up and up. There's a finite number of these things in the world. In the case of Bitcoin, if you hadn't heard, the magic number is approximately 21 million. A finite number of Bitcoin are quote unquote minted. And in reality, every year there are fewer and fewer of them actually in circulation. And the rate of attrition, the number of these that just disappear, they're not going to be the number of them that are stolen, but the number of them that are lost, right? It's unknown. Probably with time, we'll start to get statistics as to what percentage of them are really circulating and what percentage of in this way disappeared. There have been a number of headline-grabbing newspaper stories of people who lost millions and millions of dollars because the so-called keys to access their Bitcoin were on a hard drive, and the hard drive is destroyed, the hard drive is lost, the password to that hard drive is forgotten. Now, to give you a very plausible scenario, what if your father bought some Bitcoin for you? Your father's an elderly person, and one day he's going to pass on the Bitcoin for you, and then he has a heart attack. It's on a hard drive. Nobody knows the password. Nobody's alive who knows the password. The Bitcoin will, in effect, cease to exist. They'll cease to be in circulation. So every year, if we're starting from 21 million, the same way that the number of collectible comic books, like a Superman or X-Men comic, or the number of Mickey Mantle baseball players, the way that's getting fewer and fewer, right? In some ways, you can say the value of any particular Bitcoin you have, it's reliable in as much as the desirability remains. And the scarcity, right, it's fixed, but they're actually going to become more scarce with time, right? So that's the value of Bitcoin as a collectible item, right? Neither truly as a currency nor as an investment. Now, it's an unreliable collectible item because you can't even have the sense of security that you have a comic book or a baseball playing card in a safe in your house, that it is located somewhere that's safe. Again, your house could light on fire and burn down. You could put it away in a bank vault, but the bank is robbed. It's possible, right? It's very unlikely. But with something physically real like that, you can feel certain you've stored it somewhere. People do this with paintings. They own valuable paintings and they're kept in a warehouse. And they pay a lot of money, and it's a secure warehouse where they feel certain it can't get stolen and so on and so forth. It can't get damaged by the water sprinklers turning on. Even if there isn't a fire, the sprinklers turn on and ruin your painting, so on and so forth, right? But with something physically real, there's some level of certainty. If you look into the reality of what theft means for the world of Bitcoin and digital currency, how these things are lost, sometimes just lost, but sometimes how they're stolen, right? It's not safe. It's not reliable. And its value will only continue to rise or even continue to remain stable in as much as it continues to be perceived as desirable. If people lose interest in X-Men, if people lose interest in baseball players like Mickey Mantle, the value of these collectible items will evaporate because they have absolutely no utility value. It's hard to see that right now because of the cultural currency that Bitcoin has in the imagination. But Bitcoin could become another joke that people just laugh about 10 or 20 years from now. Oh, yeah, right. Remember Bitcoin. Remember when we were fast. Cultural fads come and go. This could cease to be perceived to be something valuable to hold on to, right? Now, the other sense in which this is just not an investment is very simple, very important to keep in mind, okay? Saudi Aramco, gas corporation. Gazprom in Russia, okay? If you give these companies $1 million, you got $1 million to exist, they will take your $1 million and use it to produce something. They're going to pump oil out of the ground. They're going to refine it. They're going to put it in a pipeline. They're going to send it to people's houses. It's going to get burned. They're going to send it to car factories that burn the oil to manufacture cars. They make a product that has a knock-on effect of making other products. It's part of productivity in our society. Okay. If you buy baseball cards, if you buy X-Men comic books, or you buy Superman comic books, or you buy Bitcoin, you are buying something that produces absolutely nothing. Now, is something a productive investment? Is something productive? You can answer this question very simply by posing the question negatively. What is the productivity of a bridge? Right? Now, you may be investing in a bridge building company. You might be investing in the actual bridge itself, depending on... Okay. This is not as obvious as a company that pumps gasoline out of the ground and burns it. Right? But you can say, okay, if there is no bridge, if we demolish the bridge, like subtract the bridge, or if we never built the bridge, what would happen? Well, people would have to spend money instead having a boat go back and forth. There'd be several companies doing fair, right? Well, what really is the productivity of this munitions company that makes missiles and bombs and bullets for the American Army? Well, if that company goes bankrupt, if we delete that company, if we move the company, the U.S. Army is going to have to buy bombs from somewhere else. They're going to have to find another way to make the bombs and missiles they need, right? So if you think about it negatively this way, what is the function in the market? What is the type of productivity? What's its stage in the cycle of production that has to be replaced if you delete it, whether it's a bridge or a bomb manufacturing company or whatever, okay? If you delete all of the Mickey Mantle baseball cards from planet Earth, if there is a fire in a warehouse and if somebody has a magical wish from a genie and the genie flies around the world and burns every single Mickey Mantle baseball card on Earth, there is nothing to be replaced. There is no equivalent to burning down a bridge and then needing to have a boat, having a ferry company run a boat back and forth. There is no function to be replaced there. If there is a magical genie that flies around the world and destroys all the Bitcoin, which is not that improbable, technologically, right? Bitcoin can be discredited, Bitcoin can be hacked, right? There are things, you could have a scandal. There have already been several scandals that discredited Bitcoin temporarily, though not permanently, right? With theft at the trading company in Japan, it was first handling and so on. Mt. Gox, it was called, okay. If all of the Bitcoin in the world disappears, what function is lost that will need to be replaced? Who would step up and say, oh, well, now we have to invent something new to replace the function Bitcoin played in the market? The answer is there's absolutely nothing. Okay? Bitcoin does not have use value. It doesn't have true productivity. It is not like investing in a company that makes something and then makes a profit. It is like speculating on the buying and selling of baseball cards. You're buying a baseball card or you're buying a comic book and making the bet that a few months from now or a few years from now, it is going to appreciate in value. It's not a scam. It's not a fraud. Fundamentally, it is just silly. And what you see now are headlines about all the people who have gotten rich off of Bitcoin. There are no headlines for the people who have lost money doing Bitcoin. There are headlines every time a Mickey Mantle rookie card goes on sale and is worth millions of dollars. It does. It's covered in the newspapers. Once in a while, a Superman comic, a Batman comic, an X-Men comic. Oh, wow, $1 million, $10 million at this auction, right? And there are no news stories about the millions of people who wasted money or lost money trafficking in something that is fundamentally unproductive and intrinsically worthless.